Bert Shipp, the moderator for our Fateful Moments panel, is well on his way toward becoming a legend in Dallas television news. Not in recent years as an on-camera personality, which is our misfortune, but as a person who's been involved in television since 1953 for 40 years now, most of that time running things from behind the scenes. Since 1975, he's been assignments editor at WFAA-TV. Before that, he was news director for 10 years. Earlier in his career, he covered every major beat in town: police, courts, city hall, education. He'll tell you about his own memorable experiences in covering the assassination, and they are memorable, as you'll hear. But 1 year after the assassination, he did what seemed to be the impossible. He got an exclusive television news interview with the Beatles during their stopover in Dallas. Maybe on another day we'll hear how that was done. And Bert has received any number of awards: AP, UPI, Press Club Awards, one from SMU Southwest Journalism Forum. He also is a past president of the Press Club of Dallas and former president of the Society of Professional Journalists. Perhaps a very recent honor is high on his personal list. He won a Press Club of Dallas Cady Award, not for his television work, but for writing a column. And in the same contest, his son Brett, who works on an opposing TV station in town, KDFW, won a Cady Award for his TV reporting. It almost certainly was the first time that a father and son team have won 2 awards in the same year. I'm proud to say that Bert attended Southern Methodist University. He's married, the father of 3 children, and grandfather to 4. Bert Shipp.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here. And I would like to say that without Darwin and the fine people here at SMU, we would not have these digs, because Jim Ewell and Warren Bosworth and a couple other sorries decided some time ago that maybe on the 30th anniversary we could get together in some dark hotel room and overserve ourselves and tell stories. Well, that was an ongoing thing for a while, but we started picking up extra baggage. Everybody wanted to be there. And the first thing you know, Darwin said, this thing's going to be a disaster if we don't take it out on the hill. Thank you very much, Darwin, and all your people. We're just really indebted to you. But I like to think that many careers started at Parkland, some ended, but Parkland wasn't in existence until I think it opened in September 1954. We knew it wasn't going to be the Mayo Clinic. We knew that it wasn't the Naval. No, it ended up more like General Hospital on TV. And I had my connection with it that day back in 1963. I was at the Trade Mart, was standing by a detective. He heard something on the radio. He said the president had been hit. I said, what, with an egg or rock or what? He said he didn't know, and about that time we could hear the limousines coming down around the Trade Mart there. Another reporter and I, Jackie Renfro, we went out to the curb and shot it as it passed. Now, we didn't see anything. We saw Jackie, but all I saw was a foot laying over the back of the limousine there, and so we jumped in the car with a detective, told him to take us to Parkland. I have filmed a few scenes outside and went inside and decided I'd try to make contact with the station. I kept pestering this one guy, and he told me that he was going to show me a new trick with that phone if I didn't leave him alone. It turned out to be Merriman Smith. I believe he could have. Anyhow, shortly thereafter, I ran into Sheriff Decker, and I said, what does it look like, Sheriff? And he says, well, you ever seen a deer hit in the back of the head? Dude, nothing back there. I said, well, you can't live that way. And he says, and so I called the station, told John Allen, I said, tell him on the air that the president is dead. He has no way he can live with the wound he's got in his head. And Allen said, I don't know to do such thing. And he says, you do it. So anyhow, I told him what the sheriff had told me, and I joined 2,500 others who announced the death of the president at the same time. I think we have a long list of every first. But we have a great panel here that some of them are going to be connected with Parkland, some of them are on the periphery, but they all have a great story. Bob Huffaker was a reporter with KRLD before he became Santa Claus, and he was one of the finest reporters around the city in those days. Bob, you want to tell us what you saw and heard and did?
Thanks, Bert. I'm not really Santa Claus, but he is a close personal friend. It's good to see a lot of these good folks like Jimmy Darnell, who just sat next to me, and I haven't seen him for decades, and Bert as well. We at KRLD had planned our broadcast to begin at Love Field. There, Frank Gleber and Wes Wise began. Frank described the arrival of Air Force One, and Wes then took up the broadcast at Lemon and Inwood. He described the motorcade at that location, and later, as you know, Wes became mayor of Dallas and improved the image that the city had received during those days. And we were working, as some of the print media people have already pointed out, with tools that certainly are primitive by today's standards. Frank and Wes and I were broadcasting on little low-band two-way radios, and you had to hold the switch down or you were off the air. And we had to depend on our KRLD tower, which still spans what is now KDFW downtown. Oh, and by the way we took our cues from each other, I had a little transistor radio hanging around my neck with a earpiece in it, and that was our only means of communication as long as we were on the air. So I took my cue from Wes, from Lemon and Inwood, and then I began my broadcast from Main and Akron downtown. Long before the motorcade arrived, our object was to stay on the air until Eddie Barker, our news director, who was to cover the matter from the Trade Mart, was to pick it up, and at that point we were to broadcast President Kennedy's address live on both radio and television. But at this point we were just on radio, and television was broadcasting some ridiculous soap opera at the time. I took my cue from Wes and held forth until I described the passing of the motorcade, then I kept on continuing with an analysis of the political reasons for Kennedy's visit to Texas as long as I could, so that the motorcade would have time to reach the Trade Mart, where Eddie Barker would then take over the broadcast. And I was, of course, still broadcasting when the shots were fired in Dealey Plaza, and I was totally unaware of that, being, as some of the House's Select Committee analysts have now told me, I was 1,500 feet away, because they've tried desperately to pick up the shots out of my tape and have been unsuccessful in that. I then finally, after I had held it for as long as I could and assumed that Eddie must have been ready to pick it up by then, I stopped my broadcast, gave my out cue, and folded up my gear. I had KRLD's only unmarked mobile unit, a sort of a scruffy black Mercury Comet station wagon, and which, by the way, still, wherever it is, in whatever junkyard it's ended up, probably bears the scars of the people who crawled all over it when the motorcade passed. I then drove the block and a half back to our KRLD newsroom, which was still in a small building outside the main building at the time, and pulled up in front, getting ready to get out of the car and go inside. Warren Folks, who was doing our 10 o'clock news anchor at the time, an excellent newsman, and I wish he were here. Warren came running out the front door and told me the president had been shot and taken to Parkland Hospital. So I said, well, grab a camera and let's go. It was at that point that all of us on the KRLD news team simply began to function by instinct, because all of our plans for the day had gone out the window. And I then made it out Harry Hines Boulevard faster than I have ever made it anywhere else. Ran into a big cardboard box on the way out and knocked it out of the street. Then got to the hospital, where they had just cordoned off the entrance so that we could not get back to the emergency room through normal channels. But being a younger, much younger newsman, I simply took that old car, which was sort of new at the time, and jumped curbs all the way across the parking lot to get back to the emergency room. I had covered the emergency room and the police beat a lot as a reporter for KRLD.
Got about a minute there, Bob.
That's it?
No, you got another minute.
Oh, another minute. Okay, Bert, thanks for the cue. I then broadcast and stayed on the air as much as possible. We stayed on the air. That was what we were trying to do. Keep information coming as much as possible. And Warren Folks and I alternated on the microphone while the other one of us would go in and meet the little press conferences given by Malcolm Kilduff inside. And we were giving Connolly's condition and what information was being released at the time. And I was interviewing Ralph Yarbrough, Congressman Ray Roberts, people like that who were still walking stunned around the back entrance of the emergency room. And when Eddie finally announced that the president had died, we had not found it out even there outside the emergency room yet. And I was interviewing Jim Wright at the time, and it was at that point that I finally became so emotional about it that I could hardly go on. And I simply said, I know no one wants to say anything at a time like this, Congressman Wright, but do you have anything to say? And I handed him the mic. And Jim Wright prayed into my microphone. I have always liked him ever since.
Let's say amen to that. Yeah.
That's right.
Thank you, Bob.
And I held forth there until the hearse finally departed. Later on, my beat was the Dallas Police Headquarters, where I broadcast the live CBS coverage of the shooting of Oswald, among other things, along with Nelson Benton, our associate from CBS.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next, we have the other half of the Darnell Welch team, and Jimmy Darnell came to work for us. I worked for BAP, KXAS in the early 60s, and I knew he was going to be a great newsman because I taught him everything he knows. Jimmy, Jimmy, what do you remember from those days?
Well, of course, I was out at Love Field, as Bob Welch had said earlier, to get the president coming in from Fort Worth. And then I was in the motorcade, and there were 4 of us in the Dallas Bureau then for Channel 5 News, and Dan Owens was on the street. I think he had come in on his day off. I'm not sure Dan's here, but whenever the shots were fired, I thought it was police motorcycles backfiring. I could not imagine that there had been any kind of shooting in spite of all the publicity that had been attendant to the president's visit. And but I bailed out because my bureau chief, Jimmy Kerr, had said, bail out in case there's trouble. And I thought, well, okay, but I don't know what that means since I don't expect anything. And so that's what I did. I bailed out and shot the chaos as much as I could. And our office was in the county courthouse, which is right across the street from the Texas Book Depository. My car was still at Love Field, but I did have the office, so I had unlimited access to phone and to film, but I had no car. Also, we only had one sound camera in the entire Dallas, in the entire city of Dallas for Channel 5 that I remember, and Bob Welch, of course, had it out of the trademark for the speech. So we had to wait until a sound camera came over from Fort Worth before we could do any interviews. And by that time, Henry Kokajan with NBC had joined me, and we were kind of interviewing people as Jim Featherston brought them into the press room for his own interviews, and we would take them and do the interviews. Some of these people including a Polaroid picture that someone shot. Then after we got through with that, we decided, well, I've got to get my car out at Love Field. I can't do anything else till I get my car. So Floyd Bright from Fort Worth took me out to get my car. Well, we got out there, and it was obvious that it was about time for the president's body to be brought back out there because of all the security and everything that was in place. So I climbed up a ladder that the police had put up to get on the roof of one of the air cargo buildings. And here, looking down on Air Force One, and in the foreground was this police officer who was up there standing guard. And then off to my right comes these limousines and this hearse. And I'm standing there, and they unload, they load the president's body on the plane. And I turn around, I climb down the ladder, and I turn around, and this deputy police chief for the Dallas Police Department says, "Let me have that. That's sacrilegious." Poor choice of words, but that's what he said. So I hand him the film, and then my bureau chief, Jimmy Kerr, apparently spent a good part of the rest of the day that the president was assassinated trying to retrieve this film. To this day, it's never been seen, except there's one person that has told me that he's heard that it's been seen on the West Coast or somewhere.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Jim Mule, the only police reporter the morning news ever had. Well, he was no Harry McCormick, I'll tell you that. Jim, can you tell us something about Parkland, or maybe how about Texas Theater? Can you give us some idea? Give us a real good story.
Parkland was never around that day that I covered, but the Texas Theater was. But let me drop back just a minute to say that while the toll 30 years takes on you, I'm going to confide that last night my upper left bridge fell out. So I ask your indulgence. The fact that Tom Simmons is here is the representative of the Dallas News editors, and Buster Hass and Bill Evans. I still question today why they assigned a police reporter that morning on Friday to cover the president's arrival at Dallas Love Field. I could frankly see no sense in it, because after all, I was covering the police, and that was not a matter for me to be at Love Field. I would have probably normally gone up and joined my buddies at the police headquarters for our first morning beer. But my wife doesn't know that. But nonetheless, I did go out to Love Field, and it changed my life. Bob Welch talks about how eloquent it was. The arrival of the Kennedys is exactly that way. I left with an extremely warm feeling for what I'd seen at the Love Field. Could you ever imagine that returning down Stemmons, that you'd meet the motorcade rushing to Parkland Hospital? And I knew something was out of place because the Kennedy open limousine had one of the agents still clinging to the back deck. And I knew that was out of place. But again, they've talked about here this morning about we didn't have technology that you guys have got today. So I didn't know what was going on. I got to police headquarters. I'd already flipped over to KLIF and heard that shots had been fired. Disbelief. I hitchhiked a ride with a former Dallas Times Herald reporter coming out of the building at police headquarters, now a Dallas Sergeant, Jerry Hill, and we made our way back down to the school book depository. And there I saw officers still holding their shotguns up at the windows as if they were expecting counterfire or what. And then the question about the chicken bones came up, and there's another statement about that later on. And then, for some reason, the report came out on those squad car radios that a Dallas officer was down in Oak Cliff. And years later, I reflected, why did I leave the biggest story ever any newsman could cover, knowing that shots had been fired at a visiting president's motorcade? But for some reason, I ran and jumped in the back seat of another Dallas police car, driven by a sergeant and occupied by a captain. We made our way into Oak Cliff, and we made our way into the Texas Theater. I've got to say, one time I did get a chance to call my city desk from a Cabell's Minute Market payphone. And because I knew that something was going down in Oak Cliff, somebody had shot a Dallas policeman, and I wanted a photographer, because in those days, spot news reporters always tried to get their spot news photographers in line first. You could always get the story later. And I get Harvey Bogan, one of the assistant city desk editors, and he wants to know what the hell I'm doing in Oak Cliff. I got no photographer, but by that time I had to rush back out and grab a ride in the police car, and we ended up in the Texas Theater. And for some reason I went in the balcony, and there was a scuffle down on the main floor and everything else, and I peered over the ledge, and I watched Dallas officers take that guy down. I didn't know who he was. My esteemed colleague Kent Biffle only this morning cleared up something I've never understood as to how quickly we knew there was Lee Harvey Oswald. But once he was brought to Dallas Police Headquarters and the word came out that he was a Russian, defected to Russia, it changed my attitude greatly, I'll tell you. So I saw the start of the Kennedy arrival and ended up in Texas Theater. And again, Oswald was taken from the Texas Theater in a car that I had driven up in, or had ridden up in. So again, I was hitchhiking. To this day, I don't know who I hitchhiked back in with.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. Mr. Downtown Dallas, Mr. Ron McAllister, Jenkins, Jones, Smith, whatever name you're using now, huh? Were you out at Parkland?
Yeah, I was. I started off that day down at police headquarters, and we knew right off the bat.
Cut to Parkland, yeah.
Yeah, we knew right off the bat something was wrong, though, because Jim wasn't there. So
okay.
He was somewhere else.
Yeah.
But I was at the Trademark with you and followed the what was left of the motorcade to Parkland Hospital in somewhat of a high-speed run trying to keep up, and there was no possible way to do that. By the time I got to Parkland, couldn't even get in the front drive. So I said, well, I know another way. So I went around the back way through what they call the doctor's entrance at that time, got around to the backside, and then came up on the emergency room from there. But as the reporters who were there will tell you, there was no way of getting in, of course, to the emergency room. That was totally sealed off by the time the bus and everyone else got there. So I figured, well, there's got to be another way to get in here and find out what's going on. And since that was part of my beat, too, I finally figured it out. I'd go around to what they called at that time the DOA room, which, of course, is where they brought all of the people who didn't make it for emergency treatment. It was a little late for that. And I quickly scooted around to the backside and came in the back door. And the lady who ran that desk was named Fern Elliott. I'm sure a lot of reporters will remember. And I asked her, I said, Fern, I said, you know anything that's going on? And she says, no, they're not telling me a thing. I says, well, I'm going to try to get around there. She says, well, you're not going to get very far. And she was right. I turned a corner, and there were a couple of plainclothesmen, both armed with machine guns, and said, sorry, but we just can't let you pass this point. So I said, well, all right, we'll stay here then. And I stayed in the office there, and while I was in there, and this was sometime later, they wheeled in the body. And I asked one of the ambulance drivers who I knew at that time, I said, where's this coming from? He said, I don't know. He said, we picked this one up over at the Texas Theater over in the Oak Cliff area. It's a police officer. His name is Tippett. And of course, I knew nothing about what was going on at the Texas Theater at that time because we were pretty much in solitary in Parkland. Well, eventually it came around. I got back outside knowing I couldn't get anything done there, and shortly after that, the word came out about the fate of the president. And while Bert and 2,499 other reporters were the first to announce the president's death, I was the 2,501st. I never did get to, because my news director had shown up by that time and he took it upon himself to take over those duties. Whereupon I found out later to my chagrin that he took my mobile unit, went to his house and took a nap, and I never have figured that one out. But we were there at Parkland Hospital, and then, of course, came the announcement that the president was dead. And so we wrapped up that as much as we possibly could. Of course, there were a lot of names being bannered around. There was the name of a Catholic priest, which escapes me at the present time. I think it was something like Father Huber. And they said that he had come out and unofficially stated that the president was dead. And then a short time later, of course, we got the official word. So there was nothing left for me to do but stay at Parkland Hospital and cover the news conference, which was by that time being announced from the governor, Governor Connolly, to get his condition. And that's where the only positive thing of the whole day came for me, because I was right up on the front of the room there holding a microphone. I was working for KBOX Radio, if any of you remember the station back during the old rock and roll wars. As I was holding the microphone and the hospital officials were giving the conditions of Governor Connolly and the type of wounds, etc., I had on a watch my parents had given me for graduation from high school, and they hadn't seen me or heard from me in about a year, and my mother knew I was okay because she saw my arm sticking out there with the watch and the microphone. So there was some good that came out of that. But the thing I think that struck me most was what happened early that morning. We also watched the arrival of Air Force One as it came down, and as Jim said, his life changed when he saw the elegance, I guess is a good word. When the plane stopped, the door opened, nobody really came out, and then all of a sudden, President Kennedy appeared, and he had a way of doing this like no one I have ever seen before. And it was a presence bigger than life. I never knew how tall the man was or anything else, but he looked about 7 feet tall when he came out of that door all by himself. And then, of course, the First Lady, and I'll never forget that shocking pink suit she was wearing. She came out beside him, and then, of course, they broke and they went to the fence and started shaking hands, and you knew what a special person this was.
Thank you, Ron.
A short time later, of course, it was, you know, it was a totally different day.
You were there. Thank you very
there.
much. Yes. Thank you. If I have to tell you about Tony Zoppi, we've all got problems, because Tony is an institution here, Las Vegas. He knew more about Dallas at night than any vampire in town, I think. But Tony had a lot of experiences, and one of them, or two of them, occurred at Parkland that day. Tony?
Thank you. This afternoon we're doing a panel on Jack Ruby, which was pretty much my involvement in this, and we'll leave that for this afternoon. Ruby was in my office, as a matter of fact, Wednesday before the Friday, and I'll tell about that this afternoon. But I went down to the Adolphus Hotel Friday morning, and Andy Anderson, the manager of the hotel, was there with Will Fritz, who was an FBI man, good friend of ours, Breck Wall and Joe Peterson, who had a show there by the name of Bottoms Up, and an agent for Music Corporation of America. His name was Johnny Hitt. And we were going to watch the parade, and Andy suggested, let's go up to the mezzanine. There's a marquee over the sidewalk, and he said, we'll get a great view of the parade. So we went up there, and we're waiting for the parade, and I don't know how many of you remember Honest Joe, the pawnbroker down on Elm Street. Well, we all said, here comes the parade, and it was Honest Joe in his station wagon about 2 minutes before the parade, and everybody says, oh, hell, you know. But eventually the parade came by, and we were watching, and as the presidential limousine went by, I was holding a little transistor radio, and I turned to Will Fritz, and I said, Will, he's so damn wide open. You know, as a kid, I used to see Pathé News, and they always had Secret Service men hanging all over the bumpers and on the back of the car and all, but this was totally wide open. And I said, Will, if this was a grenade, I could just lob it in that car. And he says, Tony, don't even talk like that. So they went on by, and then we decided to go into the King's Club, which was in the Adolphus on the mezzanine, and have a bite of lunch. And as I walked in there, Chris Elson, the owner of the club, said, "There's a long-distance call for you." I used to eat there every day, and if you wanted me, he called the King's Club. And I got on the phone, and just as I started to talk, Chris came back into the office, and his lips were trembling. I can see him just as plain as day. And his lips were purple and trembling. He says, "They shot the president." I slammed down a receiver and ran back to the news. And Johnny King, the city editor, was more or less directing traffic. And I was a nightclub columnist, which in the journalistic profession is tantamount to a piano player in a house of ill repute. So I turned to Johnny and I said, "Listen, I'm not a front page reporter, but I am a newspaper man." I said, "What can I do?" And Johnny said, "Go out there and maybe you can take in some film from the photographers or something." He said, "Do whatever you can." But at least I had an assignment. So I got back in my car and I got out there about a quarter of a mile from the hospital, cars parked all over the place. I pulled into an empty space and ran over to the hospital, and I was at the emergency dock, and the first thing I saw was the limousine with the roses in the back seat and all. And I got up on the emergency dock and started walking to the emergency entrance, and two Secret Service men said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "I'm going in the hospital." So he said, "Who are you?" I said, "I'm Tony Zoppi with the Dallas News." He said, "Let me see your press pass." Well, I never carried a press pass because hell, I felt like I didn't need one. I had a daily column and a TV show, knew everybody around town. They wouldn't let me in. And I was the most frustrated newspaper man in the world, standing out there on that dock and knowing that everybody else was in the hospital. And about that time, an O'Neill ambulance pulled up to the dock and backed in, and the driver and his helper got out and opened the back door, and I saw this huge bronze casket. And up until then, nobody knew for sure whether he was dead or alive. There were rumors that Connally had been killed or was hurt, and the president wasn't hurt, and then he was hurt, and all kind of conjecture. When I saw that casket, I said, "He's dead." And they were trying to lift that casket onto a gurney, and they couldn't lift it. It was so heavy. So the driver turned to me, he says, "Grab a corner, will you?" And I grabbed a corner of the casket, and fellas next to me grabbed a corner, and we lifted it onto the gurney. And I started to let go, but the Secret Service men, the ones that wouldn't let me in, now they're going, "Come on, come on, come on." So I just held on, and I figured, boy, I'm going to get in. And I did something that to this day I can't explain. As we're rolling that casket into the hospital, I reached underneath it, and I put my fingerprints as hard as I could on the bottom of that casket. I'm still trying to explain why I did it, other than the fact that I figure, well, he's going to be in this casket, and I want him to know that Tony Zoppi helped carry the casket, and if nothing else, you know. I think that's the closest I can come to explain it. But I got in the hospital. Now, they said, follow the yellow line, which we did right down to the trauma room. And now I could really see the story of the century, you know. And we got right up to the door, and a little Secret Service fellow, about 5'8", I can see him just as plain as day. And he says, "We'll take it from here, gentlemen." And I says, "Oh no, we got it." And he says, "We'll take it from here." And I said, "Don't press your luck." And I looked over, and there was a bank of phones on the opposite wall. So I went over to one of the phones, and a man answered. And I gave him the number to Dallas News. I said, "Get me to Dallas News." And he says, "Get the hell off this line." And the line went dead. The FBI, I learned later, had it tied up all the phones. But there was a stairwell, and down at the bottom of the stairs, I noticed this girl at a switchboard, the old-time plug-in switchboards. And so I ran down there, and I says, "I'm Tony Zoppi with the Dallas News." "I read your column every morning." I said, "Do me a favor, get me a phone and get me the Dallas News." She said, "Go in that office and use that black phone on a desk." So I went in there. She put the call through, and Johnny King, who had sent me out there, rather reluctantly, he answered the phone. I said, "Johnny, this is Tony Zoppi. The president is dead. which made me the 2,502nd. So he says, how the hell do you know? Because he had all his top people out there. And I said, I just carried in his casket. And Johnny said, you sure? And I says, I'm positive. Johnny, he's dead. He said, you better be right. And I said, I'm right. Because they were figuring on putting out an extra. And they had to make damn sure, because nobody at the news at that time had heard the confirmation. And I don't want to run over my time because I have a lot of Jack Ruby stories.
That story is to be continued. Yes.
Right.
Thank you, Tony. Yeah. Hugh Ainsworth has already been introduced. His fabulous background has been relayed to you. But I talked you into maybe adding a couple of PSs to what we have going here this morning.
Thank you, Bert. I was just going to, I won't take much time because my panel ran over so long we're in trouble here. But I mentioned after we left the depository building, we heard about an officer being shot, and I ran over there and interviewed people. Got with 2 Channel 8 people, Vic Robertson, and I can't remember the other one, and we drove like madmen to get over there. Interviewed all those people, and from there was a tip that who the suspect, whoever it was in a furniture store, an old furniture store over on Jefferson. And I've been asked a lot of times, was I ever scared? And I was not scared when the shooting went off, because there were so many people. I guess I felt the odds against them getting me might be, several hundred to 1. But the only time I was scared, I went in that furniture store, and there were 6 or 7 or 8 cops, whatever, some plainclothes, a couple in uniform, and all of a sudden, we're going through, and it's just stacked up. It's dusty, it's dirty, it's not a place of business, it's a storage furniture place. And all of a sudden, somebody comes piling through the 2nd floor, up to here, his feet coming down, and I thought, oh my God, that's him, whoever he is. That's the guy that killed the cop. And I looked around, and everywhere I saw, everyone had a gun except me. And at that point, I was scared. Pretty soon we got out of there. There was nothing except cops looking after other cops. But soon we got a report that the Texas Theater was a suspect entered there, and all cars in the vicinity should go there. That was only 4 or 5 blocks, so I ran like the devil and got in there. Just about, I would assume, just less than a minute before Oswald was captured. I remember looking through the thing, and already the lights had been brought up a little bit. It was about half lights on, and there were people coming up both aisles. And I noticed one time they stopped somebody else, I guess, to throw Oswald off. They knew where he was because the man that had fingerprinted or had pointed a finger at him, which resulted in the police being called, was Johnny Brewer, who had a shoe store 4 doors down. And he had seen Oswald cringe and sort of off to one side as the cars with sirens went by. And after they went by, then he followed Oswald out to the thing, thought it was unusual, saw him go in the theater. He was the one that later went in the back and told the police through the thing where that's him there. But they didn't want to go straight to Oswald because they didn't know if he was armed or not. But then they jumped him. There were 6 or 7 total, I guess. I have talked to probably 5 of them. I think there were 2 others that I did not talk to. Oswald made quite a fight for a little guy, and I remember he was yelling, "I protest this police brutality." And he said that 3 or 4 times. One thing I never understood, there was a policeman, as they brought him out, there was a policeman with a big Stetson and kept holding it over his face so that some of the photographers didn't get his face for a while. I never understood why he was protecting him in that way. Afterward, I don't know where I got this. I'd asked Jim Ewell if he told me, but later that afternoon I started going around to the places Oswald lived, and I don't know where I got those addresses. I really don't. But I remember one time it was very embarrassing. I went to one of the places Oswald lived, I believe on Neely Street, and I knocked and I knocked and I knocked because I wanted to find out if anybody knew him, and if, this man who, in a sort of a stage of undress, came to the door very, very angry at me and spoke Spanish and did not speak much English, and he could not understand why I was there, and I couldn't understand what he was doing, and I looked and I saw he had a lady friend that he was doing it with, and I got out of there in a hurry. Earlier I'd gone by, I'll make this very brief, but I went by the 1026 Beckley and interviewed the lady that was the landlady there. at great length. And one thing, she tried to give me the signature thing that Oswald had signed in, O.H. Lee. And she said, the FBI just left and they didn't take this. Well, you want this? Do you want this? And I said, no, I don't want this. They'll be back for it, I'll bet. But that's about the extent of that day for me.
Thank you very much, Hugh. Thank all of you. Appreciate you letting me hold your feet to the fire, because these guys could all of them have great stories, could go on all day long. But thank you very much for your patience and your attendance here. And I'm sure that Mr. Payne has the drill for the rest of the day, and thank you.
Okay, thanks, Bert. Don't forget those ballots. As you go out, there'll be a table on your...
With it that day back in 1963, I was at the Trade Mart, was standing by a detective. He heard something on the radio. He said the president had been hit. I said, what, with an egg or rock or what? He said he didn't know, and about that time we could hear the limousines coming down around the Trade Mart there. Another reporter and I, Jackie Renfro, we went out to the curb and shot it as it passed. Now, we didn't see anything. We saw Jackie, but all I saw was a foot laying over the back of the limousine there, and so we jumped in the car with a detective, told him to take us to Parkland. I filmed a few scenes outside and went inside and decided I'd try to make contact with the station. I kept pestering this one guy, and he told me that he was going to show me a new trick with that phone if I didn't leave him alone. It turned out to be Merriman Smith. I believe he could have. Anyhow, shortly thereafter, I ran into Sheriff Decker, and I said, what does it look like, Sheriff? And he says, well, you ever seen it? Not had these digs, because Jim Ewell and Warren Bosworth and a couple other sorries decided some time ago that maybe on the 30th anniversary we could get together in some dark hotel room and overserve ourselves and tell stories. Well, that was an ongoing thing for a while, but we started picking up extra baggage. Everybody wanted to be there. And the first thing you know, Darwin said, this thing's going to be a disaster if we don't take it out on the hill. Thank you very much, Darwin, and all your people. We're just really indebted to you. But I like to think that many careers started at Parkland, some ended, but Parkland wasn't in existence until I think it opened in September 1954. We knew it wasn't going to be the Mayo Clinic. We knew that it wasn't the Naval. No, it ended up more like General Hospital on TV. And I had my connection.
Bert Shipp, the moderator for our Fateful Moments panel, is well on his way toward becoming a legend in Dallas television news. Not in recent years as an on-camera personality, which is our misfortune, but as a person who's been involved in television since 1953 for 40 years now, most of that time running things from behind the scenes. Since 1975, he's been assignments editor at WFAA-TV. Before that, he was news director for 10 years. Earlier in his career, he covered every major beat in town: police, courts, city hall, education. He'll tell you about his own memorable experiences in covering the assassination, and they are memorable, as you'll hear. But 1 year after the assassination, he did what seemed to be the impossible. He got an exclusive television news interview with the Beatles during their stopover in Dallas. Maybe on another day we'll hear how that was done. And Bert has received any number of awards.
A deer hit in the back of the head, dude. Nothing back there. I said, well, you can't live that way. And he says, and so I called the station, told John Allen, I said, tell him on the air that the president is dead. He has no way he can live with the wound he's got in his head. And Allen said, I don't know to do such thing. He says, you do it. So anyhow, I told him what the sheriff had told me, and I joined 2,500 others who announced the death of the president at the same time. I think we have a long list of every first, but we have a great panel here that some of them are going to be connected with Parkland, some of them are on the periphery, but they all have a great story. Bob Huffaker was a reporter with Carol D before he became Santa Claus, and he was one of the finest reporters around the city in those days. Bob, you want to tell us what you saw and heard and did?
Thanks, Bert. I'm not really Santa Claus.
AP, UPI, Press Club Awards, one from SMU Southwest Journalism Forum. He also is a past president of the Press Club of Dallas and former president of the Society of Professional Journalists. Perhaps a very recent honor is high on his personal list. He won a Press Club of Dallas Cady Award, not for his television work, but for writing a column. And in the same contest, his son Brett, who works on an opposing TV station in town, KDFW, won a Cady Award for his TV reporting. It almost certainly was the first time that a father and son team have won 2 awards in the same year. I'm proud to say that Bert attended Southern Methodist University. He's married, the father of 3 children, and grandfather to 4. Bert Shipp.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here. And I would like to say that without Darwin and the fine people here at SMU, we wouldn't